Welcome to day one of the Entrepreneurial and Innovation Ecosystems in Oregon. This is the second or third time maybe that this class is being offered, and we're excited to see you all here today. I can tell you right now, there's nowhere else I'd rather be than on this call with all of you. We would like to thank our sponsors, Portland General Electric, Pacific Power, and Business Oregon. All those three organizations' support, as well as OEDA members' support, and all of our instructors' time is what helps make these presentations, these classes, and the certification happen. Several of folks on the call are well on track to get their Oregon Certified Economic Development developer certificate, and we salute you. For some of you, this is your first course, which is awesome as well.
Good morning, everybody. Thank you so much for being here today. Thank you, Marta, and thank you, Caitlin, and the rest of the OEDA gang. It's an exciting time for me right now in not only where we are in RAIN, but also in my own life. I love that you started this off asking about entrepreneurship and the types of businesses that people would start, because it really is important to get into that mindset of being an entrepreneur, because it's such a difficult thing to do. If it was easy to start businesses, we would all do it. And I was taking a lot of notes here, so I can't wait for these businesses to open, because I want to come and eat the food and drink the drinks and purchase the flowers and hang out. And I love the foster care idea. I actually participated in a program where kids were transitioning out of foster care. It was a 3-year pilot project, so definitely reach out to me about that, because it was a pretty successful program. So I'm so glad to hear the ideas have a lot of work-life integration in them. And that's a really key thing when people are starting businesses, is if you can find a way. Work-life balance, don't believe it, it's not a real thing. Work-life integration is a real thing. And now in the Zoom world, we have the opportunity to do that. So I'm excited to be here presenting to you today. There's a few polls we're going to have as we go. I want to be as interactive as possible. And I really want to make sure that you guys raise your hand or use chat, or even just interrupt me. I'm not offended by that. If I say any terms, or if you want to chime in on something, I really want to hear from you. There's also a lot of entrepreneurs already on this call. So I'm excited to be presenting to you today. This is actually the 4th time we've done this course at OEDA. And we did 2 of them virtually, 1 in person, and then now this 4th one. So I'm excited to be back and presenting to you all. So let's get rolling. What I've been asked to talk about is this sort of intro to entrepreneurship and innovation ecosystem building. And what I like to do is include data from lots of different experts in the field. Yes, I've been doing this work for about 15 years off and on, and have been an entrepreneur and innovator myself. But what's great about entrepreneurship and innovation, just like any good startup, you're always pivoting, you're always listening to the market. And all organizations should do this, whether you're a chamber, a government organization, an EDO, or a tech company. We should all be in that mindset of pivoting. So thanks, Marta, for the introduction. I'll just add to that, that I'm actually an entrepreneur who's contracted by RAIN Catalysts to serve as the CEO. And I have other clients, but RAIN Catalyst is my main. Some of you may know RAIN as Oregon RAIN. And what's really funny is that was never our legal name. But everybody uses it because it became a DBA, but really our DBA is RAIN Catalysts, and we've become global. We started out helping with tech transfer out of the University of Oregon and Oregon State University with engineers and innovators who had really cool ideas and wanted to find a market and commercialize. And then we quickly pivoted because rural communities and small communities, not just in Oregon, but all over the globe, started calling us and saying, hey, we know we have great ideas here. We have great support systems here, like the SBDC, like chambers, but we actually need to shift our economy and build an entrepreneurial ecosystem. And that's become a thing, and we're going to talk about that. I've also been the CEO, co-founder of 2 tech startups. One massively failed, and one I sold as a techquisition. And I can tell you right now, I learned everything from the failed one. And I'm sure many of you on this call know that success is not really the best teacher. I've raised $1 million in seed capital for my own startups. I know how difficult that is. And this was 8-10 years ago in Oregon. And I'm a white educated female. So if it was difficult for me to raise capital, now, if you're a person of color, if you're a single parent, if you're a veteran, if you live in rural, if you're a first-time entrepreneur, all of these things, unfortunately, stack against you and there's barriers. So one of my passions is helping reduce barriers to entrepreneurship and innovation. And now I do get to invest in other startups. I have about 24 investments in startups, most of whom are led by women and people of color. I just got back from Pakistan. Rain got a US State Department grant, and this really is a passion project for me. And because we get to work with women who are in cultures where success isn't always seen as a positive. And when we did this one event, I put this image in because one, these women are just incredibly smart. They're working on pharma technology, they're working on software, they're working on apps, they're working on consumer products. And I just love the app the Pablo Picasso quote, "Everything you can imagine is real." So all of those things you imagined at the beginning of this call, all of those businesses, that is real. And you don't need to do it alone. And no company, no entrepreneur should ever work alone. You know, working with an entrepreneur is a community team building project. So I want to start off with a poll. I don't know if Caitlin or Marta is going to pull this poll up, but it's some ecosystem terminology. I'd like you to check all the ones that you could define right now if I was to call on you. Select the entrepreneurial ecosystem terms you can define. So select all that apply, and we're going to cover many of these. So if you don't know them, that's okay. And I know that you have an amazing group of speakers throughout today and tomorrow where they're going to be covering some of these terms as well. So select the ones that you could define right now. Okay. Have at least 50% taken the poll. I can't see that side of the back end. Okay, great. All right, let's close the poll and share the results and see where we are. A lot of these terms have become much more popular and talked about. Awesome, this is great. So crowdfunding, I'm so glad, because a couple years ago that was like barely 2%, and crowdfunding means a lot of different things. Placemaking, great. I know that's entering a lot more of economic development, asset maps, angel investors. Excellent. Great. Thank you all for taking the time to do that. It's really helpful to kind of see where we are. Okay, some other definitions. The definition of an entrepreneur, when I was having success in my second company, I would get contacted by the media, and some of them would ask, what is the definition of an entrepreneur? And I said, well, really, it's you're starting something from nothing. You take risks, you innovate and disrupt. And this one is my favorite. You learn how to be comfortable being uncomfortable most of the time. So those of you on this call who have said that you have started businesses, you know exactly what I'm talking about. There are days where you're just like, what am I doing? This isn't working. And then COVID hits, this pandemic, and you're like, oh my gosh, what can I do? How do I respond to this? It's not an easy thing. So that's an entrepreneur. And then there's innovation, right? Because you can be innovative, but not be an entrepreneur. And many businesses are innovative. This is when you're launching new products, new methods, new ways of doing things and organizing things and adapting. So that's being innovation. That's innovation, different from an innovator, which I'll talk about here. So after my first company failed, I reached out to one of the investors who I was really close to, and I said, hey, Mike, let's get together and start a business, like literally after the company had failed. And he's like, well, let's get together and talk about it. And I remember he grabbed a little Bevnap off of the bar, and he wrote these 5 words on it. And he said, look, I don't have the stomach for startups. And I was like, what are you talking about? You're super successful. You've helped sell so many businesses and, you know, you're worth about $50 million. Like, what are you talking about? And he said, look, there's 5 different types of people in business. There's the ideator. These are people who have different ideas all the time. Someone at the beginning said they have a list on their nightstand of all these ideas. I'm that person too. And I thought everybody had cool ideas all the time, but that's not true. Then there's the starters. These are the people who love the clean slate. Like, let me start something from brand new. That's me as well. Then there's the innovator. This is someone who's actually creative with their hands or their mind. They can code, they can sew, they can program, they're in a lab, they're innovating. These are inventors. That's not me. I come up with ideas. I help start. I've been the CEO of 2 tech companies. I can't program 1 line of code. Actually, that's not true. I can do old school HTML, but I can't do any of the new fancy programming. A grower is someone who takes an existing business and takes it to the next level. So my friend Mike said, look, get a startup going. I'll fund it, get it to $1 million. I'll take it to 10 million. And then he's an exiter. He's like, then I'll help you sell it. So he circled grower and exiter. And this is what he is. I'm not really up in that part of this area. I've participated in exits. I can do the grower part, but I'm passionate down here. And I share this because in the beginning of early stage startups, everybody has to wear all of these hats and they need help from organizations like all of us on this call today. So there's an evolution of entrepreneurship and innovation in economic development, not only in Oregon, not only in the US, but globally. And not too long ago, we really kind of focused on a 3-legged stool. We were like, there's BRE, business retention expansion, there's recruitment of businesses. And then startups didn't even make it into that 3-legged stool until recently. It was really more tourism marketing, right? Those were the most focused areas of economic development. Now it's become much more integrated and more representative of where we are heading as a society. And any healthy economic development strategy, I don't care if you're a town of 300 people or 3 million or 30 million people, you should really include all 3 of these: the talent development, the place-based making, and then that traditional business development in order to really be thriving. Now, depending on where you live and your region, some things may be 5%, some may be 70%. And it really is going to change as your community evolves. But these are things that should be top of mind in your region. So many of you rated a pretty high percentage for place-based or placemaking. Can you throw in the chat what placemaking means to you? Just throw, and it could be 1 word, it could be multiple words, it doesn't matter. Just want to get a sense of what folks are thinking. Creating community spaces, awesome, Tyler. What else? What else comes to mind? There's no wrong answers here. Community, perfect. Placemaking. I'd love to see a couple more. Collaborative space, awesome, Amanda. Yes, co-working, capitalizing on assets, community identity, awesome, great fun downtown areas. Beautiful job. You guys have got this in the bag. A lot of entrepreneurial ecosystem building is now focusing a lot on placemaking, and there are really 4 different types: standard, strategic, tactical, and creative. And I'm not going to dig too deeply in these because that we could do a whole workshop on placemaking, but I am going to focus on the tactical one because this is where you create spaces through phases and you roll them out rather than just like a full-on, let's construct this new thing. Because just like in a startup, your business plan that you write tomorrow is pretty much obsolete. At least 100% of it is, because markets shift, you learn new things as you do customer discovery. And as we are doing economic development and placemaking, we should also not just throw it all out there 100%. It should be done in phases. Because I'm from Philly, I want to use the tactical example, placemaking example called The Porch at 30th Street Station. Has anyone here ever been to the 30th Street Station in Philly? It is, one of the busiest train stations in the nation. It's beautiful. The building is just incredible. And it's not far from Drexel University. It's right down the road from where I went to school, as mentioned earlier. But it was a scary, scary place to go in, to walk out at night. There was a lot of crime. And what the city did was they decided, let's activate that space. Let's change the story. Let's take a previously undesirable, underutilized space and turn it into a really cool gathering place. And the reason I share this is because entrepreneurs are the ones activating the space with food trucks, people who want to do retail pop-ups. I heard a few people want to do floral shops. Well, you don't want to just go and rent a space in a downtown until you're sure your business model has legs and there's a market. And so you can test these here. Veneta here in Oregon and Lane County has done a great job with retail pop-ups, partnering with the U of O and the engineering department to build really cool temporary retail spaces to test out people's businesses. So that's one way to think about place making. We're also hearing a lot about innovation districts. And I know you're going to hear from Jordana at Bizzo later, talk about the 10-year innovation plan, which is great. But there's some things to consider through placemaking. Innovation districts have the power to affect the quality of life. And these are the things that we should be monitoring and looking at: sociability, accessibility, usability, livability. And there is a great report here. Hopefully you guys can grab your phones, because in a minute I'm going to show you a QR code that you can scan to download this document. And it's all about how, is your city really keeping up with the pace of innovation? And you can unlock your city's potential through inclusion, through community mindedness, and really being strategic. So I'm going to pause for a minute so you can scan this. And I can also send these links later to Caitlin and Marta. But this is a really great read, and it doesn't matter where you are from. There are elements of this that you can include, as I mentioned, even if you're a town of 300 or 3,000 people. Okay, so now, what do you think of when you hear the term entrepreneurial ecosystem? Throw that in the chat. Cool. And I love the Art in the Alley program in Vermont. I'd love to hear more about that too. Connection to resources, community of entrepreneurs, collaborative networks. Awesome. Yes, that's a big piece of it, Tyler. Wraparound programs. Yes. Thriving economy. Perfect. Growth, collaboration. You guys have got it. So here's the sort of academic definition put out by the Kauffman Foundation, who really is our nation's foundation that really studies the economic impact of entrepreneurship on America, and they drill down within communities. And really, it's this interconnected system. It's interdependent actors and factors coordinated in such a way that they enable a productive entrepreneurship. And this is key within a particular territory. Entrepreneurial ecosystem building should never be done in one town. It should be done in a region. You can do it in towns, but then you're really missing out on the connection of actors and other networks that are spread out around in your region. And this is really a job creator. So you're all in this because you're passionate about entrepreneurship and innovation, but Kauffman has done longitudinal studies over 20 years. And a lot of people think net new jobs come from the big businesses. But in actuality, if you look at the blue line here, firms 0 to 5 years old, these are startups, are creating the net new jobs. So we're not talking about when a big business hires 300 people. You have to look at it from a net perspective. Has that business laid off 500 people last year? Well, then those are not net new jobs. Unless they're creating a brand new division and being innovative and then creating jobs. But you can see that the net new job creation is really coming from the startups. So it's really important to support it. And there's a lot of research to back that up. So Babson University probably has the best entrepreneurship MBA program in the world. There's other universities really catching up to them, but these are the elements of an entrepreneurial ecosystem. And it kind of looks busy, but what we've done is kind of simplified it. And I think what's most important is nobody on this call, except those who are entrepreneurs, should ever be at the center. We talk about this hub and spoke model. And the challenge with that is the hub is usually an organization. The hub should never be an organization. It should always be the entrepreneur that we're serving. This is Roxana from Gilgit-Baltistan up in Pakistan, who she gets gemstones and creates jewelry. And so she should be at the center. And then within her region, these are the 10 elements that ecosystem catalysts, meaning all of us on this call, should be monitoring and filling. And there's scorecards that you can check for this, right? Like education and training is SBDC, it's RAIN, it's many of you on this call, it's universities. And all of these elements are at play. So the ecosystem builder has to have a certain DNA to do this work. And Rosemary Truman, founder, CEO of the Center for Advancing Innovations, I think she says it lovely, really well. Entrepreneurial ecosystems are spurred by people with drive, courage, and grit. Doesn't that sound like entrepreneurs? And those that constantly adapt. So that's being able to pivot and agile, but also drive disruption. So my mantra for Vero Ventures, my own personal business, Vero means launch in Italian. So I love, there was someone who's going to start Italian food and Indian food. I think I definitely want to be a taste tester for you. But my tagline is thoughtful disruption. So you don't want to just disrupt just for the sake of disrupting. No one likes that person. But these are people who get things done and are innovative. And ecosystems are messy. They, you have to be able to embrace the chaos and look for the gaps. And it is uncomfortable, just like I said earlier, I'm uncomfortable so much in my life, and I've learned to work that muscle so that it's a positive thing that works for me as opposed to a negative thing. But these ecosystems, even though they're unpredictable, they can and should be measured. So let's talk about some tools to support the entrepreneurial ecosystem. There are toolkits out there, and these are sort of the things that you should have in your toolkit. And this is just a sampling, which is a lot of items. At RAIN, we've got about 75 items in our toolkit, and we pull out if you need a hammer or a nail or whatever. And I love that Tori's on here in Grant County, and Tori has been an amazing partner at Grant County Economic Development, and Michelle from Cresswell, who have invited us out. And there's different toolkits that we pull out of the bag depending on what's needed. So for example, you should always start off with a regional readiness assessment, and that you should do a stakeholder map, because not one person, not one organization should assess a region. It should be assessed by like 30 different stakeholders. I'm not going to read through all of these, but we're going to go through some of these. And I know you're going to do a lean canvas later, which is awesome. There's got to be survey templates, accelerator curricula, media kits, co-working space floor plans, and business models. I can't tell you how many people have opened, oh, there's a cool downtown empty space, let's turn it into co-working. Well, how do you know that's what you need? When we first got invited into Florence, there's a beautiful empty building there. And everybody said, let's turn it into, an innovation space. And I was like, well, how do you know that's what your community needs? It takes a couple of years to figure out who's there. And what they really found out they needed was small manufacturing space with retail storefront. And they're still trying to work on that. So there's a lot of different tools in the toolkit. And I just want to share what a regional readiness assessment looks like, because it can be this convoluted thing. This is an actual one done, and I won't name the region where this was done, but everybody gets a score, everybody gets the survey, and you score it. And these are a sampling of what is looked at. And it's going to go back to those 10 elements of a thriving entrepreneurial ecosystem. And we tell you what the high and the low score is. If the total score is less than 25, it means that region is really not ready to build their entrepreneurial ecosystem. They then need to work with other groups to help figure out, how do we get the leadership in place to get there? Like RDI, Rural Development Initiatives, they do some really great work with helping put leadership in place and training on how do you get a community to really have the right individuals, those actors and factors that are in place to support a thriving innovation economy. You can also look and see where there's drastic differences, right? Like over here, inviting in an expert to do the work. The low is a 0, which means I don't know. And the 3 is the high is the agree. So you can then start to identify gaps and start to tease it out and address it. Okay. I'm just going to pause for a second. Any questions at this point before I move on, or any comments?
I have a question that somebody asked me in direct chat. Will we be sharing, or is it later in the presentation, all of the terms that you asked about in the poll? Or are these just general concepts we'll be forming our definitions around today? Or do you have definitions handy?
So in 50 minutes, I'd love to be able to dig deeper into all of them. We will be talking about some of them, and then I know some of your instructors are going to dig deeper into some of them as well. Like you're going to do a lean canvas, which is awesome.
Perfect, thank you.
You're welcome. Okay, so we need to sort of shift our minds a little bit. When we're in person, I like to dim the lights or light some candles or do something to sort of like put us into a different place, because mindset shifts are uncomfortable and they're important. And it's sort of inherent when you're in the mind of an entrepreneur. Who here, hopefully you guys all did your pre-homework and watched Ernesto Cerali's TED Talk. Do you want to help someone shut up and listen? And I can't see everyone, but maybe just use the raise your hand feature if you watched it. I'm not going to call on you right now, but I'm just curious to see how many people watched it. Awesome. Great. Awesome. And so much, I've been studying Ernesto for about 20 years, and his enterprise facilitation model for entrepreneurial development is brilliant. And he talks, as you guys know, a lot about how it's done wrong. Let's talk about some takeaways. I would love to hear from you guys. Those of you who did, you can just unmute. You don't need to wait. You can just unmute, throw some things out, or put them in the chat. What were some of your takeaways from his talk? Anyone? Remember, we're getting uncomfortable. We're shifting our mind. Throw anything out there. Respect entrepreneurs, yes. If you're wanted, if you're not wanted, don't be there. Yes, Megan, absolutely. Listen, yes, servant of local passion. Beautiful. You guys have hit it. So really, don't make assumptions, ask questions. So many quote unquote experts swoop in instead of join in, which is a very different feel. Don't patronize, right? He talked about that. Oh, we're here to help you, don't help people who don't want it. Beautiful, Megan. Become a servant, right? Sit with the local people. Do not work from offices. RAIN has 23 people. We have 0 infrastructure. We do not have any offices because all of the work is required to be done in the communities. Whether you're sitting at a coffee shop or a library or a city hall, it doesn't matter. 0 infrastructure. The infrastructure should be the entrepreneurial infrastructure. Nobody in the world can succeed alone. Entrepreneurs rarely come to public and government meetings on their own. You have to have a catalyst sort of pushing them there to say, hey, let's go and talk to policymakers about the barriers you're facing. Yeah, so these are some of the things, and leaving your agenda at the door, I think, is a really big one. Meet people where they are, not where you think they should be. Absolutely, Heather. And for many people who watch this, you might think, gosh, duh, this is something we should all be doing, but people still do not do it. My favorite part of the talk is when he talks about how they planted the tomatoes, I think it was. And then, the people in this country were like, nobody's saying anything because he's there to save the day, and he plants all these tomatoes. And the next morning, all the hippos came and ate all the tomatoes. And they're like, oh my God, what happened? And this is why we don't plant tomatoes, right? Like he wasn't listening. And then, of course, he said, well, at least we left feeding the hippos, right? Like at least they did something. And if you want to read the book Dead Aid, it talks about the billions and billions of dollars that are put into developing countries that is wasted money because they're doing economic development upside down and backwards and from a very patriarchal perspective. So these mindset shifts that need to happen. So Erin and Monica and Alina, I see you guys still have your hands up. Did you want to say something or? Okay, just wanted to check in. So these are the things to think about. Always know failure is an option. You can really shift your own culture in your organization. Default to yes. We try and say yes to everything in the entrepreneurial ecosystem. Even if we can't say yes right now, we say, okay, look, we want to get to a yes. but I don't know if the county's going to let you put that road in. I don't know if you're going to be able to convince the airport to change their flights so that you can do export, or the railroads. Like, but hey, let's try, like, let's go after it. Let's see what we can do to make that happen. Right? Yes, Liz, that I definitely see what you're saying there. So you want to kind of be open. There's also a thesis called the Boulder thesis that it was written by Brad Feld, who really, he was the founder of Techstars. He and his wife were very successful in New York, tech company, looked at America, said, where do we want to move to help build an entrepreneurial community? They actually, Corvallis, Oregon was one of the communities they looked at. I met with Brad in Boulder, and he ended up, they picked Boulder for many reasons. And having him on talk about that would be awesome. But these are the tenets to building an entrepreneurial ecosystem. It must be led by entrepreneurs, supported by government and everyone else. You have to have a long-term commitment. That's 20 years, not 2 years, not 5 years. So I want to give, Michelle from Crestwell a shout out. They signed 5-year MOUs with us because they know this is going to take a long time, and convincing your councils of that can be challenging, inclusive of anyone who wants to participate. It doesn't matter who they are, where they're from. If they want to help, let's find a role for them and let's turn them into a champion. And you have to engage the entire entrepreneurial stack. What we mean by that is lots of culture activities, meetups, pub talks, pitch events, states of the startup. After 5 years in Florence, we did a state of the startup. We had entrepreneurs. By the way, rain should never be at the front. It should always be the mayor at the front, the entrepreneur at the front, the economic development group at the front, leading those conversations. We're in the background catalyzing, right? So these are some things to consider. And I just want you to listen to Brad take, I think it's about 3 minutes here, talk about how to create a startupville in your own town. Let me know if you can hear it. Can you hear it? No?
I can't. Oh, we can't.
At Foundry Group, the venture capital firm in Boulder, Colorado. If you go back to the industrial era, everything ran in a hierarchy. Businesses had a boss and people worked for the boss, and you worked your way up the hierarchy. As we evolved from industrial society to information society, we started to see some changes. In entrepreneurship, especially at the very early stages, there is no hierarchy. If the hierarchy tries to drive the startup community, it essentially stifles it. The hierarchy is really collapsing, and many, many, many more aspects of what we do are behaving as a network. This was the starting point for thinking about how startup communities evolve. What I came to was a thesis that I call the Boulder thesis that has 4 parts, and those 4 parts are essential for a sustainable, vibrant startup community anywhere in the world. First, it has to be led by entrepreneurs. I define the universe into 2 categories of people: leaders and feeders. The leaders in this context are entrepreneurs, and the feeders are everyone else that participates in the startup community: university, government, venture capital investors, angel investors, service providers, lawyers, accountants, et cetera. The feeders have very important roles. They become part of the fabric of the startup community, but the feeders can't be leaders. The leaders have to be entrepreneurs. Second is entrepreneurs have to take a very long-term view. It's a generational view, 20 plus years. It's people who are making a long-term commitment to invest heavily in the development of their startup community. The right cliche is that you're running a marathon, not a sprint. In a startup community over a long period of time, you're going to have some extraordinary successes, as well as some really huge failures. When somebody's incredibly successful, that person is still part of that startup community. When somebody's a failure, have a wake, move on, reincorporate them into other things. You're essentially saying it's okay. It's just part of the process. Third is you have to have a philosophy of inclusiveness. It's not just other entrepreneurs, but anybody who's interested in being part of this startup ecosystem. If everybody contributes energy into the startup community, it'll get bigger and grow faster and be more successful and be more fun. And the fourth is you have to have activities and events that engage the entire entrepreneurial stack. Those activities and events need to be more substantive than an award dinner or a cocktail party They have to be things like an accelerator program like Techstars that engages the entire community in helping a set of startups get going. Or something like Startup Weekend that's essentially a simulation of entrepreneurship. So those four pieces are essential for the long-term health of a startup community. It's just this sort of network chaos of entrepreneurs doing what entrepreneurs do, which is create things. That force of the entrepreneurs to build something bigger than just themselves and their company is so incredibly powerful.
So that the book that Brad wrote, and he wrote it with Ian Hathaway, who's actually been to Eugene to do talks on innovation districts. This is sort of our Bible, for lack of a better word, the Startup Community Way. And I put the QR code if you want to scan that to purchase that. You can also download the ebook, but it's a great resource for any community who wants to build an inclusive and sustainable entrepreneurial ecosystem. It introduces terminology. We end up buying it for the city councilors, for the city managers, the mayors, and you know, starting a book club around it is a really good thing to do as well, because it takes time to shift mindsets. Okay, so infrastructure that's needed to support the thriving entrepreneurial ecosystem, because remember, they're complex, like we talked about. There's a lot of moving pieces here and they're messy, but they are measurable. So here are some things that everyone should be measuring depending on what you're doing. So around entrepreneurship, let's look at demographics, age, gender, race, geography, anything else specific to them. Jobs, how many jobs are created, saved, pay rates. Also type W-2, 1099. It's taken us a long time to convince certain folks that a 1099 job is a job, because that person is not taking a job from someone else. And, you know, and they're activating and they're participating in the job culture, right? Next is the actual startups themselves. How many created, how many failed, industries, revenue, geography, prototypes, their reach. Are they local sector, traded sector? And this is all done through surveying. And our survey response rates are about 82%, because every single person on the RAIN team, there's 23 of us, we're all entrepreneurs. So we all have the street cred. So when we send a survey, they take the survey. Capital, what's needed, raised, activated, leveraged. And then we track the type of capital. Was it and even within this loan, was it a loan from a bank? Was it a loan from a CDFI? Was it equity? If it's equity, was it angel? Was it venture? Grants, crowdfunding, what kind of crowdfunding? And then measuring human capital. You have to have that network of people, mentors, talent, investors, and then also activities, events, programs, types, locations, outcome. Every darn thing is measured. I have a mantra: if you can't measure it, don't make it, because you could do great stuff, but if no one knows about it, did it really matter? So there's the University of Oregon does this capital scan every 2 years. I just put the QR code up there as well, so that you can, if you haven't read that, I recommend it. It really tracks the supply side of capital in Oregon, not the demand side, which we've been asking for, because it's one thing to come out of the capital scan to say there's $400 million in Oregon through CDFIs and venture funds and grants and so forth to invest in the entrepreneurial economy in Oregon. But what does it mean if you're not asking about, well, guess what? We need to raise $3 billion and there's 400 million. So there's a huge gap there. So that, you know, you have to, this is a good start, but we also need to look at the entrepreneurial side. There's also physical assets. So these are, if we're tying back into those 10 elements of the entrepreneurial ecosystem that we're measuring. Do we need accelerators, maker spaces, incubators, co-working, labs? Is the media participating? And must track the barriers. Are there funding, cultural, market, workforce, geography, policies, regulations? And we really want to shift our mindset and work with people and become open sourced actors, not closed sourced actors. Does anybody want to take a sort of just a guess at what I mean by that, being closed sourced versus open sourced? I mean, this is tech terminology, like closed source software versus open source software. closed, one and done. That's a good guess. Anyone else? Costs. So if you have closed source software, it means I'm protecting my code and I don't want anyone else to see it. If you're open source, you're putting the code out there, open and available to all. Yes, Tina, you got it. So we want to be open source with who we are. So for example, this 75 toolkit that we have, if you reach out to me and say, gosh, I'd love to see a sample readiness assessment, or I'd love to see, do you have some slides that you did on a pre-accelerator or Rainmaker? Guess what? Most of it's on our YouTube channel. We make it open and free and available because what we care about is elevating the entire economy. You have to leave your ego out of it. And these are some common mistakes when people are building entrepreneurial ecosystems. RAIN is a part of a 300-member coalition across the nation, started by the Kaufman. We run the Slack channel for it. If anybody wants to be invited, let me know. There's 300 service organizations and economic development groups all talking about entrepreneurship. And we're all trying to debunk the old way of doing entrepreneurship. People see it as this linear journey, like, okay, you're an entrepreneur, you first work with an entrepreneur organization, you go to an accelerator, you go to an SBDC, and then you raise your money. Well, that is not the way it's done. And it's still being taught that way, by the way, in a lot of places. It's more complex. You may end up going over here and get funding first. In my first startup, I pitched vaporware, which means screenshots of an app, which basically we were Pinterest 3 years before Pinterest ever existed. We raised $600,000 and we hadn't programmed a line of code yet. So, there's a lot of different ways to doing startups. And if we try and force our entrepreneurs into that linear model, we are failing them. So you want to make sure that, again, because this is something that's really important to think about, is trying to become the gatekeeper. I can't tell you how many times I hear, this is our lane, stay out of our lane. You're over here, you're over there. No, we're all driving down the same road. You should not be in the middle. You are not the hub of the entrepreneurial ecosystem. The entrepreneur is, and you are one of them on the outside of the spokes. So very important takeaway to go back. We have to be good stewards to our ecosystem. And we have to always ask, do we have enough talent to support Roxana, or is she going to leave the area? There's a business in Eugene that will remain nameless, was doing manufacturing. He was about 10 million in sales. When I talked about earlier that he needed a road designed in order for trucks to get in off of West 11th, and we could not get policymakers to adjust. And he ended up taking his company to North Carolina. And now that's a $40 million company. He created 300 jobs in a rural community in North Carolina. And that was a big miss because they were stuck on being linear. They were stuck on not, trying to default to yes. So the point is, the entrepreneurial journey is not a straight line. You do not want to be trying to control the ecosystem. Don't ever say, stay out of my lane. That's my lane. That's your lane, please. Build bridges, not gates. And remember that the entrepreneur needs to be at the center. And these are the 10 elements that you want to make sure that you're constantly monitoring and scoring, because it is a very complex system, but every person on this call and every community member has a role to helping that entrepreneur and innovator. So I just want to give you some quick examples in Oregon of these 10 elements. So the entrepreneurs and innovators example in Corvallis, WIN, the Willamette Innovators Network, holds Shark Tank, where entrepreneurs from anywhere can come and pitch, and investors are brought in. And it really features and showcases the entrepreneurs and innovators in the region, which normally we're hidden behind closed doors. We're in garages, we're in our home offices doing stuff. We need a catalyst to bring us out and showcase us. Next is local and global markets. I mean, just think about the Willamette Valley in general, right? Our soil, our wine, our beer. We're the largest exporter of grass seed. 90% of the filberts, are made here, grown here in Oregon. So thinking about what is it that your region is known for regarding local and global markets. It's just thinking about it a little differently. Investment capital. So here's what the funding cycle traditionally looks like for a business going through stages of discovery all the way through manufacturing. We don't have enough time to get into each one of these, but you can see that there are certain points of a business when a company should be going after angel money versus venture money versus crowdfunding versus loans. You have to really understand the life cycle in order to know where to refer someone to, because the mistake that was made in my first startup, I got referred to a venture fund when I was over here, proof of concept. I was able to raise the angel money, but by the time I went back to venture, they were like, your deal is stale. You haven't done enough according to what you said in your original plan. Crowdfunding has become extremely complex, and there's Kickstarters, which is like pre-purchasing of products, versus Republic. We did a deal with Republic in New York City, where anyone in Oregon who wants to raise between 50,000 and 250 can put their deal on the platform. We helped a brewery who needed to raise about $70,000. 122, or not just Oregonians, these investors came from all over the nation, put in as little as $100 each toward helping this company open a brewery in Eugene, because they could not get a traditional bank loan, and they were definitely not bankable by a venture fund. Thompson's is on there now. They're doing handrail disinfecting. They're raising, they reached their minimum, but they're raising 250,000, and they've had 27 investors invest. Any one of us right now can put $100 in. I put $250 into this deal, or $500 into this deal, and it kind of tells you what the terms are. And I'm not going to get into the details of that. I could do a whole separate workshop for you guys on how to do crowdfunding. Physical assets. Who's done this really well is the City of Independence. Is there anybody on from Independence? I don't know if I saw anybody, but Indie Commons and their kitchen incubator, they rock it. They did a really great job of listening first and then building physical assets based on who they find in the region. Culture and media, Sayusal News in Florence does an incredible job. Their editor shows up at every single entrepreneurial event that we or the SBDC or the chamber hosts, and they write about it. So we've given them a media kit so they understand what terminology to use, how to properly spell people's names. We make their job easy. And Malia Spencer, if you're working with anybody in the high growth tech traded sector, geez, space. I only had one cup of caffeinated tea so far. You want to pitch them to Malia. We just pitched to her a $20 million fund that we're raising with the Portland Seed Fund. So if anybody has any tech startups in their region or in Washington who needs capital like 250K, send them to us, because we want to help them get their funding. And 60% of that 20 million needs to go into tech startups led by women and BIPOC founders. So we're specifically targeting and doing outreach to those communities. And then we want to write about it and celebrate it. Then there's the government and policy. So here's something, some people like to sometimes say, oh, Oregon legislature, they're not doing enough. They're not doing enough. Well, recently they've done a lot to support the entrepreneurial ecosystem. There's some bills that they've passed. There's some funding they've provided for technical assistance. They've made critical updates to their entrepreneurial development loan fund. We were able to get a chocolate company who you're going to hear about on a panel later, Moku Chocolate, based in rural Philomath, got a $25,000 grant from Business Oregon to help her purchase equipment. She was able to create jobs as a result of that and really grow. Then there's the mentors. I mean, gosh, there's so many great people doing this. EDCO has their stable of experts in Bend. They've done an incredible job of assembling a mentor network. There's education and training. Many of you on this call, I looked at the list to see, who's here, who's doing this work, and hopefully I didn't forget anybody. Clearly, cities and counties and all, we do a little bit, but there's a lot of ecosystem partners working to support entrepreneurs at various stages or various backgrounds, and also culturally specific organizations. And if you're clean tech, you go to Virtue Lab. So Oregon, actually, when I started my first startup, that one that failed, gosh, hardly any of these organizations existed other than like the SBDC. OEN looked a little different. There wasn't a lot going on at that time. There was one venture fund and they had 750,000. That's it for the entire state. I mean, that venture fund now has like 40 million. So the ecosystem has evolved. And then there's workforce, right? So the coastal workforce boards do a really great job of focusing on the maritime sector jobs. Lane Workforce has created all these sectors that you see, tech down to childcare, and they have specific strategies for this because, again, they're intentional. You want to be intentional. Every day you go to work is intentional. When the days I feel like, gosh, I'm just checking my email, where we're all stuck in that, and we all get stuck in that, are the least productive days for me. It's the days where I'm like, I'm going to intentionally reach out to people I know working in the construction aggregate business and see what do they need, and are they innovating, and do they know that there's this other business doing something similar down in this other area? Should we connect them? Are they competitors? What can we do to bolster that sector? And then, of course, obviously there's the ecosystem leadership. And in Grant County, Tori, I'm so glad you're on, because you guys rock it, doing such a great job of pulling together the rural communities, John Day, Canyon City, Prairie City. You're going to hear from Digit with OSU Extension and talk about how she and Tori and others put the cyber mill together, and they're expanding that. And they're doing a great job of listening to what the community wants. By the way, the model we initially launched there, like workshops and stuff, didn't work in Grant County. What they wanted was street fairs. So Zach, the venture capitalist there, he hosts street fairs. And he started in John Day, and now he's taking them around, and he's going to do 3 a month, I think. I don't know, Tori, you can tell, but there's not a lot of retail space. So they had to create these retail spaces. And his first Harvest Fest had 38 vendors. Most of them were from Grant County, selling stuff that they normally just sell out of their home. Bringing those cohorts together to create those natural collisions is really, really powerful. And remember, entrepreneurial ecosystem building is a team sport. We do not say, get out of my lane. We do not say that I do that, you should not do that. We want to make sure that we're being inclusive and inviting everyone in. Okay, we're coming to the end here, guys. I have a couple more polls. So we just went through those 10 elements of the entrepreneurial ecosystem. The second poll is going to ask you, you can select all of them, but we'd only want you to select 3. Select the 3 ecosystem components that you believe, oh, this one says strongest, but that's okay. We can go ahead to the strongest, that you believe are the strongest in your community today. So just select 3. And then we'll do the weakest next. And is Caitlin or Marta controlling that?
Caitlin is running the polls. I am monitoring the chat. Division of labor for the win.
I love it. Thank you. So Caitlin, whenever you feel like you've reached a decent amount of people taking the poll. So the 3 that you think are the strongest based on the definitions and examples that we just gave.
Waiting on that 50%, Caroline. All
Okay.
right.
And if you don't know, just take guesses, you guys, based on what we did. Okay, excellent. You might have to scroll too. So actually having entrepreneurs in the region, great. Government buy-in, I love that that one's as high as that is. And then, okay, so basically, I mean, the weakest one is kind of being addressed here, but it's always different when you're asked the question as opposed to first rating the strongest and the weakest. That's why we do that. Okay, thanks for doing that. And then let's go back to the next poll, which is the 3 ecosystem components you believe are the weakest. So you're thinking about it differently now. And again, what's really important is if you asked 20 other people in your community, they may rank something strongest as you ranked it weakest, which is why that regional assessment is so key. And you get buy-in from everyone, not just your organization out of the gate. Okay, for sake of time, why don't we close the poll, Caitlin? Okay, so weakest areas are, what are the highest ones here? Investment capital, that's always the weakest one. That's one definitely. Human capital, that's also a tough one in Oregon, right? And then housing, of course, tends to come in in with that as well. And then the markets, local, global markets. Well, thank you. These are things that you should be, testing and monitoring on a regular basis so that you know how to fill the gaps. Last poll, we're going to pull that same poll up from the very beginning and know that we only had 50 minutes here, but let's see, which terms do you feel like you can define now? And we did not get to talk about all of them in detail. Okay, let's pull it up. All right. Okay, so business model canvas, or I'm sorry, Boulder thesis went from like, what was it, 2% to 73%. So I'm glad, because that is such an important thesis in supporting your entrepreneurial ecosystem. Placemaking went up. Regional readiness assessment, awesome. This is really great. Angel investor asset map, absolutely. So thank you guys for taking the time to do that. And I know we don't have time, but this is something I'd love for you guys to think about. Instead of that, Caitlin, do we have a couple minutes? Maybe I can take some questions.
We're just about out of time. Because I think our next presenter is already here as well.
Yeah, no worries.
They're about to start.
Let me put my email in the chat. Please reach out if you want to talk, even if you want to bring those startup ideas to fruition. I would love to help you do that. I'm definitely selfish about some of those, self-serving about some of those. I guess you just use the raise hand feature if you felt like this was a valuable exercise for you, and you definitely don't need, there's no pressure on that. I'm just curious. I want to make sure that the content is there. Usually, we get a full day to talk about this stuff, but at a quick glance, I just wanted to make sure you got introduced to. Great. Excellent.
Yeah.
All right, you guys. Well, thank you so much for inviting me. I appreciate it, and good luck with the rest of your program. And I look forward to supporting you all in the future.
As Marta indicated, let me explain just a little bit. I wear two hats in my ecosystem. I'm privileged to be the director of the Small Business Development Center for Klamath and Lake County, South Central Oregon, here at the bottom of the state. The other half of my time I spend directing the Klamath IDEA, which is an entrepreneurial ecosystem building initiative in our county. So very, very similar but different work. So I get the exciting privilege to be here in Mark Gregory's stead. So Mark Gregory, the state director of the Oregon SBDC network, couldn't be here today. So I am a stand-in for him. So let me tell you a little bit about I'm going to approach this from two perspectives. One is my Klamath IDEA hat, my ecosystem builder hat. And then I'm going to dig in a little bit about the Oregon SBDCs. So from an ecosystem builder perspective, in thinking about the question, how do you sustain a healthy ecosystem? I think the very first thing you have to think about is to keep an entrepreneurial pipeline perspective. So a lot of the work that we do is in the weeds with folks. And when you're thinking about building an ecosystem, sustaining an ecosystem, improving the health of one, you got to get out of the weeds. You got to get at like 10,000 feet and look at that, whether it's a region or a community, and figure out what's there. So a pipeline perspective, what I mean by that is understanding and appreciating that we have establishments in our communities or regions that are all across a pipeline, and we have to understand in ours where they sit. So I've given you a little example of Klamath County's pipeline. The data from 2021 is the most recent data that we have. And we have folks, we've got, 600-ish folks sitting in the self-employed pipeline, right? So they've just created a job for themselves. We want obviously people to ideally move through the pipeline into stage 1, 2 to 9, into stage 2, 10 to 99. Once they get into those stages, they become really economically valuable for us, right? We know that they can sustain, that they're out of the valley of death, that they've got some, traction and growth potential. And if you look in our pipeline, you'll see that in Klamath County, the brunt of our establishments are in those middle sections, stage 1 and stage 2. We don't have a ton of large employers here in our particular county. And that information is going to be very different for every community. But I think it's really important to understand that all along that pipeline, these establishments need different services. And I've been in this game now for a good decade. And I just kind of came in on the very tail end of Caroline's presentation, but she's exactly right. The evolution has been exciting and remarkable, I think, in Oregon, what has emerged as far as services across that pipeline in our state. So pretty exciting stuff. But got to keep a pipeline perspective, and don't just focus on, I think we get really trapped in focusing on the gazelles. We get focused on traded sector. We get really focused on innovation. And of course, because those things are economically valuable, but especially if you're in a rural place, they may not be very predominant, right? So if you're spending all of your time on your big people, when really, I mean, you look at us, the brunt of our folks are small employers, 100 employees or less. So you got to make sure that across that pipeline, you have a good perspective on what exists. Understand your economy. For us, this was very, very important. I will tell you that I'm a lifer here in South Central Oregon, and I felt like I knew we were an ag and we were a timber community. We have a very high sector concentration in a wood product manufacturing. We have a base. So understand your economy, understand what's sitting out there. When we looked at our data, for instance, when we pulled it, and what I'm talking about is what is driving your economy? What are your top 10 economic drivers in your region? And when we looked at our data, I will tell you that ag and logging, they're like way down, like 8 or 9. We were very surprised that there were a lot of other things in our top 10, certainly in our top 5. So just understand your economy. What you think you know on the ground might be different than getting the data, look at it. Understand your entrepreneurs, have a ground game. I think this is really, really key and important. You've probably heard this a lot this morning. I know you got to listen to we're assigned the TED Talk about shut up and listen. Yay. Have a ground game, get out and get to know those entrepreneurs. I think you might be very surprised at who's hiding in a garage or who's hiding in a warehouse that you don't even know exists. So get out and beat the streets, and don't assume that just because you are an economic development district or the city's economic development director that people are going to come in and talk to you, because they're not. They're just not. You got to go out and find them. So have a ground game, build a culture. That's been very, very important for us. We've done that here in Klamath County through events and storytelling. Many places are doing pub talks. We have idea talks. We've been doing them almost a decade now. Yes, they're a lot of work. I'm not going to lie to you, right? Hosting an event every month is a lot of work, but it's very important in both culture building and drawing people out of the woodwork. That's also very important. And storytelling is the other big thing. We've produced 6 videos in the last year. People love to hear stories. It's very encouraging. They like to see themselves. I believe that people can't be what they can't see. And so just telling that story, letting people know that, entrepreneurship is dirty, and you fail and you win, and it's hard, but it's also inspiring and can give people courage to give it a chance, right? So very important. We do here in Klamath, we also have established a pitch competition at Oregon Tech, and we have a pitch competition at the community college. So it's trying to kind of build into the earlier generations in our community is also a very important tactic. I know I can speak very obviously loudly for rural places that we try to hang on to the ankles of our 18-year-olds. Let them go, for heaven's sakes, let them go. They're really not that economically valuable until they're about 25. And so let them go, let them spread their wings, cut their teeth, but give them a great experience in your community earlier so that they want to come back with that venture, or bring their families back, buy a house, have some kids, right? When they become economically valuable, welcome them home. So entrepreneurial talent is universal across the earth, but environments for growing them are not, right? So make sure that you're focused on building that. The other piece that I would tell you is leverage your assets and resources. This is really much of what Caroline talked about, so I won't beat a dead horse, but there's a lot in the ecosystem, and entrepreneurs need a lot of things, and make sure that you as an organization are in fact welcoming all those things. I believe that entrepreneurs are only as strong as their networks, so share the wealth. Make sure that they're connected to your RDO, to your EDD, to other entrepreneurs, to other ideators. And they will become strong. It's pretty amazing if you let that happen. Okay, so let's talk then about my other hat, and that's the Oregon SBDC network. So in Oregon, our network is actually based in the community colleges, which is very different than across the nation. There are small business development centers located in all U.S. territories, all 50 states. There's over 1,000 of us in the nation. And in Oregon, we are based in the community college system, but we also have centers at EOU, SOU, and the Columbia Economic Team. Your SBDCs at their very core are founded and supported by the U.S. Small Business Administration. That money comes into every state by population. And then a host has to step up in that state. Lane Community College acts as that host here in Oregon. And then they subcontract that work into the community. So any community who wants an SBDC also has to have a host that will match the federal money. So your community colleges really act in that capacity, as well as SOU and EOU and the Columbia Economic Team. Business Oregon gets a lump of money from the legislature to support this work as well. So we are widely supported. The interesting thing I think about the SBDC network, while so much of what's happening in Oregon's ecosystem is new, the SBDCs have been here a long time. So it's certainly not my work. It's not Mark's work. It's 40 years old. We were established in 1983 here in this state. And so I think that the asset that comes with that is that you have this really stable infrastructure that sits under the SBDC and lots of history. So 20 centers, more than 40 locations across the state, over 100 business advisors exist statewide, and we are all interconnected. We gather very, very regularly and know one another. So if I don't know the answer to something, my real background is human resources. That's really my wheelhouse. If I don't know the answer, someone else will know the answer. Maybe someone else has owned a cosmetics business or a construction business within the network. People who advise within the SBDC network have all owned their own businesses. And so with the exception of some capital experts that we have on staff, that can be very helpful. So know that there is an SBDC serving wherever you are in Oregon. If you don't know who they are, please feel free to reach out to me and I'll make sure that you get connected with the right SBDC. I want to talk, I am not going to read this whole slide to you. You're welcome, but I think it's a great tool. I'll send this to Caitlin so that you have it kind of electronically to send to the folks. But one of the things I want to highlight about our work at the SBDC is we truly serve people all across the business stage. And so we, yes, in fact, help the ideators, those tire kickers, people who just got some money from their grandma and they really want to spend it somehow. We will help them kind of flesh that out, build a business plan. And I think SBDCs are fairly well known in the startup world. But I want to highlight some other services that we provide that you may or may not be aware of here in the state of Oregon. So we do help people all across the spectrum. The two things that we do, if you remember nothing about this presentation, remember that we do advice and training. Advice and training for small business owners and those who want to be. We do primarily focus on for-profit businesses because we are tax funded, but advice and training, that's what we do. We have some specialized programs here in Oregon. Our capital access team is actually a group, many of them are in fact retired bankers, so they know a lot about capital. And here at the centers, we're very seasoned at helping people build business plans, determine whether a concept is kind of viable or not. And then once they need capital, if there's a kind of complex stack that needs to be built, we can tap into that capital access team and they can help us locate that. Many entrepreneurs, of course, think that how you fund a business is just go to your local bank, and that's generally not at all how it happens. And so those bankers kick them to us, and we talk through the various tools that are out there, including our EDDs do a lot of early stage funding and crowdfunding, all the great things that Caroline talked about. But that CAT team can help us put together more complex packages. So that's very nice. The Global Trade Center is located in Portland. All the people that work in that center are certified global business professionals. And so they have a specialized background in helping people export. If you did not know, the brunt of the world's population, as well as buying power, lies outside of the United States. And so selling beyond US borders is a very important thing for economic development. And this team can really help people understand how to get into that game or how to be better at it. And they are specialized to do so. So we work with particularly a lot of early stage exporters in that world. Market Research Institute is another tool that we use really quite successfully with existing businesses. So I'll give you an example. In my local center, I had a small manufacturer come. They had been in business almost 30 years and really needed to update their strategy, right? Find some new markets. And so we worked through about 10 possibilities of markets where they thought they might have some opportunity, and kicked that over to the Market Research Institute, which is actually located at SOU. And Bridget did a whole bunch of research and brought that back to us, and we were able to help them narrow down really that government contracting would be a great place to get in. The Department of Defense, they were a cable harness manufacturer, and robots and aviation. So got into 3 new markets, and we then took that market intelligence and found some trade shows around those things. And those that company has gone from 1 million to 5 million in about 3 years. So just get some market intelligence. And we have just a really kind of an incredible amount of tools sitting in that Market Research Institute that are really targeted at businesses. Of course, we help people across cybersecurity, the latest threat in our world. Everything's always changing. And so small businesses are at risk there. We offer training programs and, of course, educational advising around cybersecurity. That program is based out of Mount Hood Community College. Most of our centers have a small business management program. This is really where we engage with a lot of existing business owners and helping them grow all across the spectrum, from at least 2 years in business. We generally do not allow startups to come into our SBM program because they need to have something to apply their learning to. And so the SBM program is located in most of our centers. In this program, people come in for 3 hours of class each month, and then they come in for 2 hours of one-on-one advising. They, across a 9-month period, do develop a learning contract, identify 3 to 5 targeted goals that they'd like to achieve or learn or better in their business. And then they help with the help of their advisor, dig into those goals and make that happen. So very, very key services for existing business. The one last thing I will highlight on this sheet is succession planning. I think this is something that people probably don't even know happens under the hood at the SVDCs, but it's a very, very important economic activity that's happening. So when people are ready to get out of business, and we've seen a tremendous uptick in this, of course, after COVID, people have made some decisions in their life that cause them to say, I'm out. And what happens to that business, right? Do they transfer it to another generation? Do they sell it? Do they just have to hawk their assets because they've not managed themselves financially? And the SBDCs have a number of succession planning experts and can help those businesses plan. And we have worked on both sides of the aisle. So we work with the buyer, we work with the seller to make sure that transition happens. I will tell you, here in Klamath, we've done a tremendous amount of that in the last 2 years. And our community would certainly notice if all of a sudden those, I can think of 4 this last year that we transitioned right on our main street, if those 4 public facing businesses disappeared. And people have no idea that underneath the surface of that, we help to find buyers for all of those businesses and keep them going. And it is obviously economically easier to pass it to someone else and keep it going than it is to go back to the beginning of the pipeline and start over. So very important services that we provide. I will tell you that I think we are best suited. The SBDCs really are best suited for businesses that have 100 employees or less. Once you get to that level, people are hiring their own marketing person, they're hiring their own CFO, they're hiring their own HR person, and they don't need as much of us. But gosh, if they have 100 employees or less, I'm certain that there's something we can do to assist them. And I would also tell you that the SBA, though, tells us that we will help people generally with 500 employees or less are considered small businesses. So this one I'm going to spend about 30 seconds on because it is so complicated. What I really want to say about this is just kind of a picture of the partnerships that the SBDC has. I talked about us being in the ecosystem for 40 years. So the feds, the state, everyone kind of knows that we are present. And so there are connections built into all of these systems, whether it's the employment department, the Chamber of Commerce, the government contracting programs, they're all kind of tied in. And we work very heavily with partners to make sure that our entrepreneurs have what they need. And that's really all I'm going to say about that. It's my understanding that Caitlin is going to share this slide if she has not already separately with you. So, and then just quickly talking about the impacts that your SBDCs have. You can, by the way, get one of these impact statement for your region by contacting your local SBDC if you'd like to know what that looks like. But this is our statewide impact and the things that we are asked to focus on economically by both Business Oregon and the SBA, helping with capital, of course. But again, I would just note, if you look at the pre-ventures, people think we're just for startups, and really we spend about 40% of our time with startups and helping those people, but we really spend about 60% of our time with existing businesses, working across all demographics and in all places, rural and urban. So I think you were going to do questions kind of at the end after the next presenter.
Well, thank you, everyone. I'm really excited to be here. So I am a year in my position. I moved here from Boulder, Colorado last March. And part of what I'm going to talk about today is a little bit more holistically what I've seen work in entrepreneurial ecosystems, both in Colorado and here in Oregon. So I'll start out at a pretty high level and go into some of the research that I've been looking at. And this is pretty fresh for me because when I moved to Central Oregon, I had to really understand what was available, what was already happening, where were the gaps, and then where in my role I could most be helpful in filling those gaps. So it'll be a little academic for the first 3 or 4 slides, and then we'll get more into the nitty-gritty and the detail. And then at the very end, I'll just, for those who aren't familiar with economic development for Central Oregon and my role specifically, I will go into a little bit of background on how I intersect with traditional economic development and why we're actually pretty unique in Central Oregon. So startup communities, there's stakeholders that come into the startup community. And this is both from the MIT stakeholder framework and from Brad Feld from Startup Communities. Hopefully this isn't duplicative of things that people have talked about before. We have the entrepreneur, risk capital, corporate, government, and university. There are other agents who are part of this. There are mentors, there are individual investors, which also go under risk capital. But this is really like when we look at who makes up the ecosystem, these are usually the players who are involved. And I will pause for a moment and say, you know, there's innovation and there's entrepreneurship. And so a lot of times they get conflated. And I think
as we're looking at, and as I was looking at, like, how do we build up and support the entrepreneurial ecosystem, just being really clear, like, innovation is like a process of taking new to the world ideas from inception to impact, and entrepreneurship is how that impact actually gets into the world. And so I think there can be entrepreneurism without innovation, and a lot of times there can be innovation without entrepreneurism. And so the sweet spot is really trying to figure out, how do we marry that, and then how do we bring that into the world, and it will be an iterative process, as we'll look at in a moment. So in addition to the stakeholders, there are roles, and this is from Brad Feld from Startup Community. He thinks that, and his theory is that for any ecosystem to be successful, you have to have entrepreneurs. And the entrepreneur is someone, which seems obvious, but you have to have entrepreneurs who are actively building companies, but then you have to have the entrepreneurs who are successful. And it almost becomes a flywheel. And so the quote, to whom much is given, much is expected, like, the role of the entrepreneur in the ecosystem cannot be understated. And then everyone else he considers a feeder, and they're important roles. So just because they're like labeled as a feeder doesn't mean that they're not important. But I do think, for me, being in economic development, to really understand, as I'm stepping into Central Oregon and the ecosystem, what my role is and where I can put pressure or where I can add resources to move the entire ecosystem forward, versus trying to be a leader in it. So I see my role a lot of times as supporting, finding those entrepreneurs who have been successful and giving them the platform and helping to support them as we're trying to build this economic, or this entrepreneurial ecosystem. And so it goes into what we call a complex adaptive system. Again, like, this is just super high level, but for me, it was really helpful to understand that there are a lot of things at play when we're trying to develop and build an economic or entrepreneurial ecosystem. We have the agents and the people on the ground. We have feedback loops. We have patterns that we're looking for. And this is always adapting. When someone new comes in, it's a new input, and we can continue to grow the community in a way that's regenerative. The one place that I think is important, and it almost seems minimized, is in the agents, there are these connective tissues. And that's what's really important, is like, how are we connecting everything together? And what's our role as people in economic development and in the city government to make sure that these connections and intersections happen. And finally, another way to think about this is there are drivers that come in. So we have ICAP is innovation capital, and ECAP is entrepreneur capital. And so we have things coming in like human capital and funding and infrastructure and demand and cultural incentives. And so as we were looking at building and really re-engaging with the ecosystem in Central Oregon, partly because of the pandemic, like, a lot of this had gone on pause. So this was an opportunity for us all to come back together and say, like, where are we? These are places where we can start looking and say, like, where are we on human capital? Where is our weaknesses and where is our strength? And where are we going to put a little bit more time and attention in order to build out this ecosystem? So that was kind of the academic side of it. And I will provide those resources to Marta so that she can share with everyone the MIT work, the startup community work, and then the thought of the complex adaptive systems, which is also part of the startup community work as they've been moving forward in their thesis around this. But I would say, like, a couple of things that really stood out is that place matters. Start where you are, look at what's working, and then what we call the nudge theory. And so place matters. People want to come to Central Oregon. There are the policies that are available, and, what are we doing as a policy and government to support entrepreneurship? And that matters, but a lot of times people just want to live where they want to live. And so we have an influx of people, especially in Central Oregon, but I know in a lot of places in Oregon, there's an influx of talent and people and innovation coming into the area. And there's also people leaving, which sometimes we might say like, that's not good. Well, actually, what that does is it helps create connections around the country, and that helps bring in new ideas and fresh ideas. And so as any system is not going to be static, it's always going to be dynamic, it's always going to be moving. And so if we can collectively help create the vision and then understand how people can participate in that vision as they're coming into our communities, that will help move us forward in a way that we're all bought into. And so I would say place matters. It also matters because I'll give Central Oregon as an example, and I'm going to show a little bit of the work that I did when I first started in my position to really understand what exists. Is there are certain things that resonate in certain places. And so here, for example, in Central Oregon, climate resiliency is really important. And so is outdoor product is huge. So those things are already existing, and it's not about like stopping and bringing something in that doesn't relate to the place or doesn't match with kind of our identity. It's really around how do we maximize what's here. Another reason that that's important is when we're looking at an entrepreneur ecosystem and we have startups, we want to really understand how we can support them. And supporting them on this last slide is human capital. And so if a company comes here and they start here and they're in biotech and there's not a big biotech industry, then they might start. If it doesn't work out, they're like lost. They don't know where they can work. But when we start to have clusters of industries in one place, then we can start building up talent. And we see that in Central Oregon for sure. And the really wonderful thing about where Bend in Central Oregon is right now is with OSU Cascades, they're very responsive to the needs of businesses and to the needs of like where the region is heading from an industry perspective. Start where you are. I think it's really important to look at what exists and then to be able to fill in the gaps and to really start looking at where are you now. Kat had talked about like some of the great resources of pub talks and making sure that you have events that people can go to and places where people can convene. And if you don't have that, maybe start looking there, start around like what sort of associations exist. Would it be helpful to help get an association going that can bring an industry together, that can start to create momentum? So really understanding where you are and then look at what's working. A lot of times I think it's easy to look at what's not working and want to fix it. And this goes to nudge, which is a nudge theory of change, which is it's easier to change when we know what's working and we can do more of that than always trying to fix what isn't working. So this is what I did. So I went through the startup community and they talked about what makes for a really healthy ecosystem. You have companies. I'm going to go down the left-hand side. Investors, risk, capital, accelerators, incubators, support feeders, activities, events, and co-working spaces. And so what I did when I moved to Central Oregon is I just went in and I tried to identify like what were the industries that were most prevalent in Central Oregon, and then understand like who is in the space and what is missing. And by filling this out, I could see that so talking about like what's working, outdoor was really working in Central Oregon. We had a healthy ecosystem. We had a lot of companies. We had some that were established. We had some that were in the growth. We had some that were in startup. We had funds that would support them, the Village Family, OBF, Cascade, our Bend Venture Conference. And then we had accelerators, both BOW and the Ben Venture Conference, looked a little bit nationally outside of what was available. And then also looking at what the supporters and feeders were. So we had EDCO and we had the SBDC and OSU Cascades. And finally, who are the clusters, the nonprofits? We have Oregon Outdoor Alliance, Opportunity Knox, and then we have EDCO has its pitch talk or pub talks every month as a way to help highlight some of the work that's going on and get our startups in the community. And so going through this and making it available to all of our stakeholders so that they could also participate in this and fill in the places. And then we collectively started seeing where there were some gaps. And so, for example, we just launched the area just relaunched the Cultivate Bend Association, which is for food and beverage. And part of that was because we had gone through this exercise and realized that we had a really strong association for outdoor, but not for food and beverage. So let me see if I can go back to my first one. Hold on. Are we back in the?
Yep. Question slide.
Awesome. So before I go into questions real quick, I'll just talk a little bit about EDCO and my role. So I am the Venture Catalyst Director. There are two of us, or three of us actually, in the state who have the same scope of work that I do. Laura Kupasek and Mike White. And our role is solely to work with traded sector companies and to help them grow. We look for companies who are mostly looking for venture, but we do help companies who are also looking to grow through debt and more traditional funding. My position is tied directly with the economic development. And one of the reasons that's really nice is because there are area directors. So EDCO has 4 area directors: Redmond, Sisters, Prineville. We have someone from Lapine who works with us, and Bend. And so I work hand in glove with them. They're the people who are out in the community. They come to me. Usually entrepreneurs are not saying like, I know what I need. Usually they have a help, an SOS call that goes up. And so when we have people in the community who they trust, they can reach out to them, and then we start to work together. Assets under my work that I do are the BVC, the Ben Venture Conference, and the Pub Talk. And then I just do a lot of one-on-one work with entrepreneurs and connect them to resources. And finally, I do some ecosystem work where I work with Opportunity Knox and all of the associations to help really elevate and grow the ecosystem. So I'll just pause and turn it back over to Marta.
So super briefly about rural development initiatives, for those of you who don't know us, we're a nonprofit that's been supporting rural communities in the Pacific Northwest to lead their own economic vitality efforts since 1991. Next slide. All right, and so we have 4 areas of service that have developed over time, and this has really been very responsive to the needs that we see in communities. So our leadership programs build community capacity to work together and lead community development efforts. Our economy building programs support communities with economic development planning, sector-focused development, Main Street capacity, and entrepreneurship development. We also elevate rural voices and priorities through spotlighting rural issues and conducting trainings on civic engagement. And we connect rural communities with resources, including bringing people together at our biennial rural conference, Regards to Rural. And I have definitely seen some of you at that conference. And then I just wanted to, go ahead and to the next slide. I wanted to give a special shout out to Christian Vasquez Rivera. He is a colleague of ours who moved on to the Washington County Chamber of Commerce. But he used to deliver this workshop, and when OEDA reached out to us, we immediately called him and said, Christian, help us brainstorm this. And so he gave us tremendous insight that's helped shape this content. Okay, so the purpose of this session is to help practitioners better understand their local entrepreneur business community, identify gaps in services, and develop sustainable efforts and programming to promote inclusion, equity, and diversity. I just want to make a comment that I know some of you are exceptionally skilled at this already, and you may not be learning a lot from this. Others of you might have things to learn, but we would love to have insights. What we'll be doing is kind of giving this sort of lecture part of it, and then we'll have a small breakout group and then a big group discussion. And we would love to have you at the small group breakouts and large group discussions contribute your perspectives and deep knowledge about this topic. Okay, so what I'm going to talk about is 3 steps that we think are helpful for developing equitable programming around entrepreneurship. And then Brenda's going to talk about some key mindsets for this work. All right, next slide. So the first step is knowing your community. The second step is assessing the community, and the third step is developing culturally appropriate services. All right, so to focus in on the first step, next slide. Okay, knowing your community. So first, it's kind of important to know who is in your business community. This is like identifying the composition of the community that you are working in. And when you do that, you can get a picture of all of the different groups that need services. And by business community, I'll just clarify that I mean existing businesses, but I also mean entrepreneurs and potential entrepreneurs. So it's sometimes difficult to know who these people are. What local community development services are already available, and who is currently accessing those services. So by identifying the programs and services that already exist and who is currently participating in them, it's easier to understand where the gaps are, of who is not actually accessing the services and where the services are not reaching the entire business entrepreneur community. Okay, the next slide has some resources for this first step. So some data sets that we use to help understand the population. A really good one is the Ford Family Foundation's Oregon by the Numbers. So that's Ford Family Foundation is Oregon based, and so they do a really nice book that kind of has county level population information. Census data is also really helpful to understand percentages of around demographics and population trends. And I think they do things by the zip code level. And then, of course, there's other local data sets and information resources that I think a lot of you can use, cities. There's a lot of different sets that are out there. We particularly find it useful to look at changes over time so that you know if a particular population is increasing or decreasing. In rural Oregon, specific groups you may want to be looking at are youth, Latinos, tribal members, veterans, people of color, retirees, LGBTQ, and people with disabilities. But there's such incredible diversity. It's going to be very community specific, and there's probably greater diversity than maybe than you may think of initially. So there's going to be data on some groups, maybe not so much on others. It's important to be aware that there's going to be gaps when you're looking at this data. But this at least is going to get you a good start of understanding demographics. Okay, next slide. So the second step is assessing the community. So this step really focuses on using the data that you collected in the first step to identify groups that are not being served adequately, and then assessing these groups further to understand their business development needs and priorities. Okay, next slide. So this slide is about kind of an assessment approach. So what information do you need from the groups you have identified as being underserved or that you maybe suspect are underserved? You want to find out what services and support that they need and prioritize. You want to find out why they're not using existing services, if that's the case. You want to find out the conditions needed to be in place for them to access and to benefit from services. So I'll give you an example. RDI works extensively with rural Latino entrepreneurs, and we know that many of them need services in Spanish, that trust needs to be built, that families are a priority. So things like childcare for trainings are very important, and scheduling when it does not interfere with work or families or community events is really important. So those are just a few small examples. So the second column here is about how do you find out this information? We use a lot of surveys and we try to make them pretty simple because people get survey fatigue and don't like to fill out long surveys. But with a simple survey, you can get quite a bit of information. We often translate them into multiple languages. And these surveys ask basic questions around business support needs and how to prioritizing the types of, to help prioritize types of services to offer, and also maybe ask about communication preferences. We also recommend complementing a survey with focus groups to get a better understanding of how services would ideally be delivered and by whom. We often do this in partnership with culturally specific organizations and local organizations that work and have the trust of the groups that we're aiming to connect with. Focus groups enable you to understand the reasons why people may not engage with services. So you might know, oh, they're not engaging, but you're not quite sure why. So this is a chance to really talk to people and dig in and figure out, what are the barriers, such as lack of trust or language barriers, economic barriers, specific support needs, things like that. Okay, next slide. So the third step I want to talk about is then developing culturally appropriate services. And so that's kind of, taking the first two and using that information to inform how services are delivered. So in this step, you think what services are needed but are not being offered. So hopefully through the first, the focus groups you've identified, oh, well, we offer this class and this class, but really this class is what's needed. You can also find out, what populations are, like, why aren't populations accessing services? And then you can design the programs to address that. Oh, we haven't built trust. Okay, we need to maybe partner with a culturally specific organization to be delivering this, or whatever the answer is. So some other examples are people with disabilities may not be coming to classes because they're not held in an accessible location. So you could change the location. People are more geographically dispersed in rural regions and may not want to travel. These are all things that we've kind of run into. So we've seen where an SBDC will come, will pre-plan a time to come to a community. And so multiple people from that community can access support all at once. Again, Spanish-speaking entrepreneurs need access to capital, which is not offered. It may not be offered in the region. It's not offered in all of the regions that we work in. So sometimes we will partner with a CDFI that offers services in Spanish. Those are just a few of examples of how you might, how you can kind of think of how to modify the services that you give to meet the needs of different groups. All right, next slide. All right, so that was kind of a quick summary of just this sort of very logical process of how to analyze services and modify them to meet needs. And now Brenda's going to talk about key mindsets for providing inclusive services. And we developed these a few years ago in partnership with capacity building partners so that we could support service agencies to be more effective. For us, it was specifically to reach rural Latino communities, but we think the principles are relevant across many types of diversity. So I'm going to hand over to Brenda now.
Okay, so yes, so even when we use these 4 mindsets to reach our Latinos communities, they work for anyone, anyone that is trying to provide inclusive services. So I want to start by asking you, what is a mindset? Do we have a volunteer? What is a mindset?
Open.
Okay. Anyone else?
Positive. So just because something didn't work in the past, don't discount that strategy. Maybe just it didn't happen for other factors. So keep trying, positive in that way.
Okay. All right. Well, thank you so much. So a mindset is a set of beliefs that shape how we make sense of the world and ourselves. It is going to affect how we think, how we feel, and how we behave in any given situation. So the following section contains 4 mindsets that can help you be more inclusive in your services and outreach practices. Also, this can be used as a personal assessment to understand your readiness to engage with diverse community members and business owners. Okay. So the first mindset is move from instruction to a relational mindset. So first, we are going to demonstrate this mindset with a quote. So please read it and notice what is your reaction, where your mind goes. If you have come to help me, you are wasting your time. But if you have come because your liberation is bound up with mine, then let us work together. When I think about this quote, I think how this really describes how I feel and how I would like to receive services. If I thrive, my whole community thrives. Okay, so how do we change from extraction to a relational mindset? So here are some approaches. First, shifting from I to a we. Center the mission rather than the organization. Shift from doing to doing with. Decision-making processes include those who are most impacted. Shift from transactional approach to a long-term partnership approach. Sometimes I see organizations or communities looking for feedback on new projects. They need comments, opinions from the whole community. So they approach minorities. But what they do is simply checking a box. After minorities give you feedback, they don't hear from you again. There is no a real effort to build a relationship or to gain their trust. So what we want with this relational mindset is for you to think how both sides can benefit. How can you center those that are most impacted? So we are going to have some time to talk about this mindset. But first, I'm going to give it to you, all of them. And then we're going to have time at the end to discuss about more about them. Okay. So the second mindset is changing from a need base to an asset base. If you focus on people's weaknesses, they lose confidence. So the language that we use is very important. Makes people want to participate or not. Nobody wants to feel sorry. We actually want you to value what we bring to the table. So here are some approaches. Understand and acknowledge that underprivileged people bring unique values, skills, and knowledge to our society and the problems that we seek to address. Those who experience the problem often have the context and the information to solve it. Maybe they don't have the tools, maybe they don't have the funding, but they have ideas. And sometimes they just need someone to ask, how can I help? Okay, so the third mindset is current future to historical context. Every system is perfectly designed to get the result it gets. So we tend to focus on the present time and where we want to be. But sometimes we forget that we have history, that our stories are affecting the way that we see the world. So here are the approaches, and I'm gonna ask someone if someone can help me read the approaches,
I can do that.
please.
Learn about organizational and cultural histories to inform current and future. Explore systems thinking and how it can inform human behavior and cultural norms. Understand systems of oppression and exclusion and how they are connected to policy and resources. Partner across difference to create innovative solutions.
Thank you. Thank you so much. Yeah, so history is really important when we design programs, when we create events, when we reach out to new communities. Sometimes it's easier to use something that has worked well for other community, but we are different. Our history is different. Where we come from is different. So make sure that you know the history of your community, that you know who is living in your community, and you know the history of those members. That will help you really plan and design your programs. Okay, so the last mindset is shifting from a dominant culture to a multicultural orientation. The American idea of racial progress is measured by how fast I become white. I think this is the quote that is the most challenging for some people. But to be honest, we see it in many services. My success is measured by the American dream of other people.
I can do it.
Perfect. Go ahead.
Develop relationships with those who are from different cultures. Voluntary displacement activities, when engaged in thoughtfully and authentically, can build connection and provide data related to cultural difference. Engage those from the culture you hope to work with in decision making and program design, or consider shifting all power and decision-making to those most impacted.
Thank you. Yeah, so dominant culture centered whiteness and the individual as a norm or a preferred way to operate. But this leaves out other perspectives and values, or sometimes they are just seen as a less than. We can better serve when we understand what other cultures describe as a success. This can help us reframe our work, our behavior, our interactions. Some examples, in other cultures, maybe we value team differently. The Latino culture value family difference. It is their focus. I don't know, maybe a different communication style. Okay, so I think I'm gonna give you some time. Now I'm gonna give you some time to discuss this key mindset. We are gonna go to a breakout room for 10 minutes.
Question in chat, what is a voluntary displacement activity?
Oh,
Just to make
that's a
sure
great-
we're all on the same page.
Yes, that's a great question. So voluntary displacement activity is where you, let's say you go to an event where you're gonna be a minority. Maybe you can go to a Mexican Independence Day. And what you're gonna do there is like, you're really gonna be present. You're gonna be listening for like, what kind of music do they listen? What are they talking about? What are they eating? So that's a voluntary displacement activity. It's where you put yourself out of your comfort zone and you're really there to learn, to see like what do they appreciate in their culture.
Gotcha. So really a difference between checking out and maybe just focusing on the entertainment and amusement value versus being there as an active learner as well.
Yeah. So here are the questions that you guys are gonna answer in the breakout room. It's like, which mindsets are attracting your attention? Which key mindset your organization is really good at? Which one feels challenging or you want to develop? What partnerships may be able to support your work? And what is something you want to try next?
We are now going to ask the scribes, the note takers, or reps from each of the breakout groups to share just what stood out in the conversation and where did the stakeholder list conversation take you? Because this is just a spreadsheet. It's a conversation starter. It's a tool to have. I'm just going to ask, I think groups had numbers, but I don't remember mine. So I'm going to ask folks to volunteer.
I'll go. All right. So our group met and I had the best group ever. Anyways, what we came up with was our spreadsheet. It was, so for me, because I work for the county, for me, it was a little like hard to pull just one city since we work with like all of the cities in Clackamas County. So that was a challenging for me. Other folks said it would be nice to add like utilities on there, you know, utilities and county planning departments would be good. And we talked about the naysayer, you know, none of us really wanted to put up anybody's name in that box. We were like, nah, pass on that, but maybe just changing that to a different word from naysayer. You know, it could be a public document. You don't want somebody to go on there and look and be like, what? You know, so that's that. The other thing was, you know, keeping this up to date could be a challenge. We found it could be a very useful tool. Like if I built it out for all the cities and had all that information on there for each city, it could be such a handy tool, but it's also going to be very difficult to keep up to date because of the people just rolling around from job to job, you know how we do. But that was pretty much, yeah, and I think that was pretty much it. You guys from our group, did I leave anything out?
It could be a training doc for onboarding.
That's right, yeah. Yeah. That's it from us.
Great. Thank you, Karina. Let's hear from the group that had Amy House.
I think that was us.
Outstanding. Awesome. Let's hear from another one. I'm going to call on Tyler Ferrari because he was in mine.
Thanks, Marta. I think one of the things that really stood out to me actually was how you brought up kind of going incognito to some of these events and really identifying those like entrepreneurs based off how they approach you as someone who is just a general member of the public. And I think that's a really effective way, especially at the college level. One thing that also really stood out to me was Tina over in Tiger, their program for helping folks pay for the cost of advancing their careers and how effective that's been, especially for folks in the trades. I think that's a great program, and it's definitely something that I'll be taking to my boss to see if there's any room in the budget for next year. And then finally, Victoria brought up their process of contacting really young and motivated workers for those entry-level employment jobs that seem to be difficult to be filled. I think that's a really great program that they're doing, especially bringing along the people seeking out those positions and really connecting them directly with potential workforce. I think that's a great effort as well, and something that I'll be suggesting to our chamber because they do a lot of work with younger workforce entrants.
Perfect. Thank you. That group was really city heavy, and I really enjoyed that. I needed that. Like I needed that in my life, in my state worker life. I really. On to the next group. I think we have 2 more to go.
I can go next. We talked about in the what resources are new to us category. Some folks talking about that surprise of not being strong on names to fill in on the healthcare kind of sector. But to recognize that that's another place where we might be generating kind of needing supports and resources and information. We talked a bit about service provider organizations and more along the line like service organizations like your Rotaries or kind of business networking organizations and how they might also be places where we want to fill in some names. We did talk about the local naysayer category and the value of having and knowing who those people are. So maybe we call it critics if you don't want, maybe it's the expert critic in your community that sometimes there's a value in seeing what they think something looks like. In the what's missing category, we talked about for some of us not having that perhaps like say in the education category, having a lot of contacts with higher level, like community college or university kind of level education, but not necessarily having kind of the K through 12 elementary high school level contacts and about how to cultivate that. And similarly, young entrepreneurs about, it's sometimes easy to find the entrepreneurs that are already in our pipelines or in our cities and that already have a little bit of savvy about how to get connected with services or know that you need to have a business license before you start a business, but that maybe finding younger entrepreneurs or somebody who knows how to connect with them is a good one. We talked about what exists in the community that's not on the list. And let me go back to the what's missing. We're talking about like, how do you, the angel investor, the kind of the somebody in the community who's got money, who's got expertise to share. But especially several of us were from rural communities, how to find those people. And maybe that's another place where we need to start thinking creatively about, are those people in our communities? Maybe they don't live there. Maybe they have a second home. Maybe, maybe they're across the border in the next county or another state, but regionally they're connected. So, but back to what exists in our community that wasn't on the lists. Kind of the idea, one thing we came up with was kind of specialized industry training. In Linfield College has a wine industry education kind of support track. And, in Columbia County, we have a brand new Oregon, we call it OMEC, advanced manufacturing kind of public-private partnership that's also working with PCC. So kind of some of these like public-private or industry specialized training programs that might also be resources for us and our entrepreneurs, and knowing whether they're in our regions or not are going to be important. And maybe that also includes like the food in Portland. I've certainly referred a fair amount of people to the food innovation lab that's in Portland. So things like that might, and those kind of fall in other categories, but maybe they're kind of a category by themselves. So did I cover it, you guys? I think I did it. Part of what was really helpful for, I think, our group was also just the chance to share instances of things happening in our communities and going, oh, what was that? And I think probably a lot of us are doing that in the small groups.
Thank you, Erin. I do think a lot of us are doing that. I think a lot of folks here on the call will serve as a hub for that information sharing at some point or another on our own free time, or, while we're in a different Zoom meeting. Of course, not this one, no. So with this, we're going to ask the last group to report out before we talk about homework.
Well, I'll keep it short since lots of things were already said, but one of the things we talked about was the importance of keeping that list going, building on it as you become more engaged in the community, and then having that list available. We talked about our hit by a bus binder. So if you're not available or move on, or hopefully you don't get hit by a bus, but kind of creating a legacy so that the next person could take over and not have to start that list over again. And then I would say we in the Main Street world call our naysayers cave people, citizens against virtually everything. So we have a technical term for that. So that's about it. That's what we talked about.
So fun fact, I serve Josephine County. We have Cave Junction, which is one of the 2 cities here in the region. Cave people is the one thing that I've been trying my region not to use anymore, but I really like what it stands for. So again, regional context, history, right? Because the terms we use can create division. I'm really glad we got to expert critic and opposition and things like that. We'll probably change it for the stakeholder list exercise next year. So let's talk about the lean canvas. We've heard about it as a key term from Caroline's presentation. If you Google or look for lean canvas on YouTube, you're probably going to get hundreds of videos talking you through just the right way or just the right format to use. So this is just one of the lean canvas formats out there. There are several out there. This is the one we're going to use for our exercise. And we're going to look at it as an economic development practitioner. So you're not a small business owner using this to roadmap your business plan. You're looking at this as a resource to help you organize your thought process in approaching solving an issue or a community problem. So I'm going to share my screen just to make sure everybody's looking at the same thing. This is what the PDF looks like. And you've got an example on how this was used to do a mind map or brainstorm a solution to find a small manufacturing space for growing product companies in Florence. So there's a traded sector connection there. I think the pain point of finding industrial space is universal. I hear that in very rural, mildly rural, somewhat rural, and urban communities alike. And in this example, experts are going to be those who make buildings happen. So consultants and developers. Champions are going to be the jurisdiction that's experiencing that need for growing businesses in their community. RAIN is listed as a resource and a champion. Entrepreneurs, because they need to be advocating and sharing their own pain points, and legislators, because it's always good to have elected officials or those who can elevate to a larger political arena any sort of a funding ask or policy change if you ever get to that discussion. The proposed solution was to utilize empty retail spaces on Bayfront to build out some of those spaces to be usable. And this is a real world problem. This is how it all came together. Some of the risks were that property owners were just not willing to sell, and negotiations needed to happen, communicating that value as more than just the sale price of the building to the property owners. And also looking at how realistic and feasible it was for small companies to pay the market rents. I clicked on that. So it starts with property owners. You look at funding available. You contact Business Oregon. I've heard that before. You get the bids from contractors. Before you make any sort of an ask, you want to know what the gap is. You look at the costs. You look at the unknowns. Unknowns can be tricky because how do you know what you don't know? How do you capture what you don't know? With critics, sometimes we know who they are. Sometimes they're behind that anonymity curtain on Facebook. But with the unknowns, it's great to brainstorm, and it's great to bring this lean canvas with some of the problem statements and possible solutions and partners filled out to somebody with a fresh set of eyes, somebody who is not trying to solve the problem using the same mindset mindset that created it. So we're going to ask you to use this tool to brainstorm and roadmap a solution or a conversation around a real world issue your community, your region, your organization possibly is facing. Feel free to make it as anonymous or as specific as possible. This just has to be something you are comfortable and ready to share tomorrow in the morning breakout session. It's not going to be as long as the one we just had. This one was like a really intensive one, I think. So does anybody have any questions? And I'm going to ask folks what possible issues or pain points they're going to be using for their Lean Canvas exercise. So questions, and what do you think you will use this for? City of Florence example is taken clearly. So asking for volunteers yet again.
I think what I plan on using it for is there's often a big request in Dallas for alternative dining options. So one thing that I will be using it for is how can we create spaces for restaurants to be opened up, because we lack full restaurant space with full commercial kitchens.
Gotcha. Oh, that's fantastic. Thank you. And that will touch on policy and spaces and businesses and wow. And quality of place and quality of life, as well as entrepreneurial opportunities, are all tied up in that problem statement. Thank you for sharing. You're getting a thumbs up from Caitlin. I don't even get a thumbs up from Caitlin Tyler. You're changing the world here. I'm actually going to call on my colleagues, either Feather or Christopher Frazier and or Heather Stevens, because I'm going to put you all on the spot. What kind of things would Business Oregon want to solve this with this Lean Canvas?
I'll jump in. I'm between two. I've been working with a small startup in Grant County, and it's been a challenge to get them the seed money to get a grant, get going, to get prototypes. So that might be a fun exercise. The other one I haven't decided yet could be, how do we help Malheur County get their industrial lands ready for, I'm thinking about the technical assistance programs that we offer, the newest one we offer, because the majority of those industrial lands up there are not owned by the county, they are privately owned. So that's what I'm thinking about.
Outstanding. Thank you. It's great to have folks from your own organization, because you can just get away with calling on them. Okay, I'm going to thank OEDA and every single one of you that stayed on the call. You've been amazingly engaged and participating. I've enjoyed our chat interactions. I kind of went a little bit crazy with emojis. Thank you all so much. This has been a fantastic group, and I've taken quite a bit of mental notes and notes on my phone throughout today. Thank you.